Development is a dynamic concept. It has different meanings for different people. In fact, there is no agreement on the meaning of development among planners and thinkers either. Some people say it means increase in income, others lay emphasis on employment, income, quality of life, happiness and so on. Still, others give stress on meeting the basic needs of the life of people. It is indeed so many things for so many people. The only thing on which everyone agrees is that development is necessary and everyone wants it, although in his own image and perhaps in his own way. After completion of this module, you will be able to learn about patterns of development and approaches to development. Development has been identified as a process of growth, expansion or realization of potential, bringing regional resources into full productive use. Development planning has also been defined as any action by the state whose purpose is to raise the rate of economic growth above that which would take place without any conscious effort. Development planning is being done by the state. It has the dual purpose of economic growth and social structural change. It is comprehensive, covering every sector, region and aspect of life. The achievement of a state of development would enable individuals to make their own histories and geographies under conditions of their own choosing. The process of development is the means by which such conditions of human existence might be achieved. They in turn would necessarily involve people in a productive, crisis-free and non-exploitative set of relations with nature and in the struggle to remove oppression and exploitation from the relations between themselves. Thus, development is an increasing attainment of one's own cultural values. This conceptualization emphasizes the following notions. First, that development is a process, not a state. Secondly, that process ultimately refers to values. And third, that the values referred to are those of the people involved, not the values of the Western world or any other world. Among the elements of a good of rich life, the following have been stressed by various scholars in one form or the other. A. More and better life sustaining goods for all. B. Respect for others and self-esteem. C. Freedom from tyranny of any kind. And D. Community life which gives a sense of belonging. These four elements are inseparable from each other. For example, if the first is achieved at the cost of the remaining three, the process could not be called development. Development planning is being done at the national, regional and local levels ascribable to particular societies. In common usage, development has the implications of economic growth, modernization and improvement in levels of material production and consumption and changes in social, cultural and political structures to resemble more nearly those displayed in countries of economics deemed developed. Many of the attributes of development under this definition can be quantified by reference to statistical details of national production, per capita income, energy consumption, nutritional levels, labor force characteristics and the like. Taken together, such variables might calibrate a scale of achievement against which the level of development of a single country may be compared. Development is a continuous process which changes in space and time. There is a debate going on all over the world, especially in the underdeveloped and developing countries, about the nature and approach of development. The major approaches and dichotomies of development are growth versus distribution, agricultural versus industrial development, urban versus rural development, capital intensive versus labor intensive development, centralization versus decentralization, modern versus traditional development, and socio-economic versus physical planning. There is a strong controversy among the planners and decision makers about the economic growth and distribution strategy. In other words, some of them support the idea that economic growth should be measured in terms of gross national product, while others advocate for distributive justice and improvement in the quality of life of the people. None of the strategies can be individually accepted as the correct approach for planning. A blending of the two is required. Planning must aim both at utilizing more effectively the resources, human and material, available to the community so as to obtain from them a larger output of goods and services, and also at reducing inequalities of income, wealth and opportunity. There are many social scientists and economists who argue in favor of growth first and distribution next. This strategy suited the interest of the ruling elites of the developing countries as it suited the interest of the aid giving countries. All including the poor were exhorted to join hands to let the economy take off the ground. Once the growth engine started moving, everyone's interest could be taken care of. What was needed was production and more production. The invisible hand would take care of the distribution aspects in the long run. The main problem that developing countries are facing is the shaky foundation of their statehood. International geopolitics is in full play to destabilize these countries. The facts show that the gross domestic product, which we usually call as GDP, of most developing countries has grown only at a snail's pace during the last 4 decades, leading to greater poverty and pauperization. It is in the interest of the developing countries to pay equal attention to the GDP and BMN. Much depends on specific circumstances and needs. In fact, it is the judicious blending of the GDP and BMN that is the need of the time, and each country will have to find its own blend. The debate of agricultural development versus industrial development is also quite old. It, however, became a major development issue in the developing countries after the Second World War. Interestingly enough, the developed countries emphasized agriculture on the ground that most of the developing countries had shortages of food which are likely to increase with increasing population. The logic presented was that the majority of the people of the developing countries are engaged in agriculture and allied activities, and hence they are better trained for agriculture pursuits. Additional investment leading to more productivity in this sector would naturally increase the earning capacities of the majority of the people. There was not much concern about the style of industrial development. Everyone appeared to be convinced that the road to industrialization could be no different from the one followed by developed countries. All that was needed were massive investments in basic industries, power, projects, machine tool industries and so on. The counter argument was that in a developing economy, only a few sectors were able to absorb modern technology. If much of the resources were diverted to them, the remaining sectors which formed the major component of the national economy would act like milestones around the necks of the leading sectors. Moreover, all sectors of the economy were so interlinked and interdependent that it would be difficult to lift one sector up neglecting the others, and hence the need for a balanced growth policy. The controversy centering on balanced versus unbalanced growth was extended to spatial spheres also. Irrespective of the arguments advanced, Experience show that neither the so-called balanced nor the unbalanced approach could be used by any developing country as a matter of principle without further accentuating its development problems. The developing countries needed both the approaches depending on the specificity of circumstances. None of these, either singly or jointly, could be adopted as a matter of principle because there is nothing like a single development situation in the world. The controversy centering on urbanization as against rural development as the means to achieve development objectives is not new. The debate has two main thrusts. One, which among the rural and urban styles of life is better for mankind, and two, which urbanization or rural development should be the strategy to develop the country. It is now generally accepted that the old archaic and traditional rural environment are not conducive to development. It needs transformation in tune with the current needs and achievements of man. Mahatma Gandhi, the greatest proponent of rural development, did not want Indian villages to remain steeped in traditions. He wanted them to change. He did not like large cities because they did not fit in his holistic and organic scheme of human development. Gandhi wanted total transformation of villages in India, not by forcing people to migrate to large cities, but by developing them from within into viable units. The Western concept of economic growth with urbanization and industrialization as its main ingredients is essentially anti-rural. Large-scale manufacturing requires large cities which could provide skills and other infrastructures needed for mass production. Urbanization is therefore taken as an indicator of development. The larger the urban component in the national population, the greater the development, so say the development experts. Most of the developing countries were convinced that urbanization was the answer to solve their rural problems. Mechanization of agriculture would release a quasi-employed rural labor force which would be pulled by expanding industries in large urban centers. New industrial growth poles and centers were created to build additional capacities to absorb labor and to meet the growing demands of other sectors of the economy. In fact, the whole development process should be so articulated that urbanization should promote rural development and rural development should back up urban development. The merging of the two processes should lead to a kind of a situation in which the gap between urban and rural areas fit terms of income, productivity, social services and quality of life in general is substantially narrowed. It is the task of the developing countries to promote the kind of urban-rural transformation described above and to avoid a dichotomous development of the two sectors advocated by urban and rural fundamentalists. Whether the developing countries should opt for modern technology or should rely on appropriate technology is another major point of debate. There are those who want developing countries to skip over technological research and development by acquiring the latest technology from developed countries. They point to the advantages of being latecomers in the race of development. These advantages, they say, should be capitalized to the maximum extent. To say that developing countries should concentrate and rely solely on traditional small-scale technologies is to deny them the human achievements of the last several centuries. It also amounts to closing the door for innovative faculties of man to grow and flourish. Small is beautiful, but only when it is seen in the light of the so-called ugly big. Is everything big ugly? Even a country such as China, which developed a cult of traditional technology, had to abandon it in favor of a more balanced approach wherein the choice is dictated by need and not by dogma. The dualistic social, economic and technological structures in the developing countries keep a large section of population beyond the reach of modern technology. It is important that traditional technology is promoted for their benefit. That, however, does not mean that modern technology should be neglected. Technology is not a static phenomena. It is something a balanced and pragmatic approach is necessary. The question really is not whether to opt for large scale or for small scale projects. It is rather where and when to have large scale and where and when the small scale ones, which gives greater benefit to the people. It is the need and capacity which should determine the choice rather than facts such as large is economic and small is beautiful. To extent, should the central authorities in a developing country control the economy and polity has been the subject of discussion for quite some time. The general tendency in most developing countries is centralize the power of decision making. The advocates of decentralization are, however, not convinced of this and would like a structure wherein the central authority has only a limited role to play. Those who advocate a decentralized government structure based on local communities are unrealistic in many ways. In the first place, they think of an ideal system of government in which the people are supreme without defining who the people are. Like Plato's republic, their village or community republics are good in concepts, but beyond the realm of the present day realities. Second, the advocates of the decentralized system often prescribe it for developing countries as if the economically developed countries do not need it. Development from above or below is another version of this controversy. The inability of most developing countries to generate rapid enough growth to remove mass poverty led many theorists to believe that it was because of the failure of central or top down planning and development. In fact, as in the case of other theories and approaches, the tendency has been to concentrate on those apparent causes and factors which could put blame on the shoulders of the developing countries. Until very recently, most Western theorists refused to go into the fundamental causes. The continuing accusation that central planning or top-down development process is the main culprit responsible for increasing poverty in the developing countries is born out of this reluctance. Those who are opposed to development from above would like the developing countries to initiate development from below. This reversal of the development gear will help 1. Meet the basic needs of the people, 2. Ensure popular participation in development, and 3. Mobilize the material and human resources for development on a voluntary basis. Central planning and development from above are processes which treat human beings as statistical units and concentrate on those issues and problems which are of national importance, often ignoring or de-emphasizing those which are faced by the people. Yet, another controversy figuring in the development debate centers on modern versus traditional dualism. One's stream of thought considers development as a process by which traditional thoughts and structures are replaced by the modern ones, while the other attempts to take back the developing societies to their distant past and abhors modernity. One considers traditionalism to be the main cause of underdevelopment, while the other blames modernity as the root cause of all evils, including poverty and unemployment in the developing countries. Tradition is often associated with something old and irrelevant to modern society, something which is inward looking and which retards progress. Modernity is anti-traditional, outward looking and changing. In common parlance, it is Western and conducive to development. Modernization and Westernization are often considered synonymous. As a consequence, when a traditional mode is adopted by the West, it becomes modern. Until very recently, the prevailing mood in the developing countries was anti-traditional. Anything old or traditional was considered bad and antiquated, something to be done away within order that the modernization could set in. Western was modern. It represented industrialization, high income, high levels of skill and education, individual freedom and an equally high level of culture. Western classics, Western music, Western art, Western modes of life and living came to be admired and anything local and traditional came to be despised. Everything was evaluated by Western standards. The civil engineers and architects advocated physical planning. They called themselves the real planners. They knew something of civil engineering or architecture and infrastructure planning, a little bit of economics and government, a little less of sociology and political science and very little of the people for whom they planned. They had a set of formula for resolving various problems irrespective of local and people. In fact, their main job was to prescribe to the people how they ought to live and to see that those who broke the rules were punished, sometimes summarily. The neglect of spatial dimensions in the development process by economists and physical planners alike led to the birth of regional science, which had the precision of physical planning and analytical ability of economics. It brought revolutionary changes in almost all and planning sciences. It tried to quantify everything, and a belief that anything that was not quantifiable was also not worth studying was set in motion. It provided the tools to state problems and their solutions more clearly. At the same time, it produced a plethora of literature, some of which contributed almost nothing to the understanding of development problems. While we do need physical planners, as we do need economic, social and other types of planners, but of a different breed. Our needs have changed in quality more than in quantity in the recent past. Now, we need planners who can work with the people and not for the people. Development is not something which can be given, it is to be acquired and worked for by those who are to benefit from it. A planner should understand what the people's needs are, what is the direction in which the society is moving, what the national priorities are and how the resources, that is both physical and human, should be used to achieve the set development goals and objectives. Viewed from this perspective, there is hardly any scope for dichotomy between physical and economic planning. Both are needed and they must have well defined tasks. In fact, planning as a field goes far beyond economic and physical planning. It is the absence of these other disciplines which has made the planning profession barren and static. In this section, an attempt is made to identify those major issues of development which ought to receive priority attention from the very start of the development planning. These issues concern all the countries developing as well as the developed and are real determinants of quantity and quality of development. They constitute the primary issues, a satisfactory resolution of which alone can create conditions for a more humanistic development process in the world. The 7 dichotomies discussed above are products of these primary institutional problems.